we are faced with huge challenges, but also going strong and facing a lot of success in our programs. So we're still open for applications for all of our programs for Ukrainians. So please apply to our programs, stay engaged with us. Today we have 3 incredible scientists from Ukraine who are going to speak about environmental challenges of the war in Ukraine. All of them are Fulbright alumni, and our moderator, Matthew J. Temple, he's also an alum of ours. So our first speaker will be Sergiy Zibtsev, who has decided to present on impact of war on wildfires in the battle and the occupied zones. We will hear also from Viktor Myroniuk, who will tell us about remote sensing-based monitoring of Ukraine's forest losses caused by the war, and Kateryna Bystrytska, who will speak about green reconstruction of Ukraine, goals, principles, and the role of civil society. And I see here with us Matthew Temple, who I will turn the floor over to in just a moment. He has been a Fulbright Scholar to Ukraine in 2021, 2022, and also to Hungary in 2007, 2008. So welcome, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Jessica, and welcome to this, what I hope will be the first of maybe several conversations about the environment in Ukraine. Title is Environmental Challenges of the War in Ukraine. And challenges is a double-edged word. Challenges enables us to talk about problems, about how bad things are. There's no shortage of devastation and destruction that we can talk about here. Challenges also talk about solutions. What good can we do and when can we do it? So I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists this morning, because I think they can talk to us very, very convincingly about both problems and solutions that are in these challenges. I'd like to thank Jessica for her leadership and support in enabling this to happen. It's not easy, I imagine, to be running a Fulbright office in the middle of a war, but Fulbright is about bridges, and bridges are about bringing people together and bringing the best out of each other. So I'd like to think that this kind of activity is a Fulbright bridge building, to bring the best out of people. And thanks certainly to Maria Kravchenko, who is amazing at pulling all kinds of different threads together into making an event happen. We could not have done this without you. Also, a little shout out to my Fulbright colleagues in Budapest, whose support and encouragement in all kinds of ways, and their networking, I think, will play a major role in reconstruction in the future. And also to colleagues of mine in Uzhhorod, the Institute for Ecology and Religious Studies, who first started to teach me about environmental ethics in Ukraine. Why should we even talk about the environment in the middle of war? There are so many other things that grab our attention and our priorities. So should we just ignore environment and say we'll talk about it in 15 years when it stands in line as a priority for us to look at? Or can we talk about environment in the middle of war as demanding our attention right now? Not just for its own sake, because maybe environment plays a role in reconstruction. So I look forward to hearing about that from our panelists. And maybe just as a kind of a symbol of this, in June, I had the opportunity to spend 3 days in Sergiy National Park in Ukraine. Truly epic forest, mountains, diversity of life, spared from the direct impact of the war. And the national park director was there. He showed us pictures of himself with military commanders from Donbass taken with him the previous week. And we drove around into remote areas of the park in a 4-wheel drive Toyota, which crossed the rivers, and in one case just went up the river a while. And he remarked that tomorrow the Ukrainian army was going to requisition Sergiy's Toyota because it is such a capable vehicle. And I think that's a good symbol of what we're talking about here. What good can we do, and when are we going to do it? I think he's glad to lend Sinovir's Toyota to where it's more needed right now, but it's also very clear he wants it back because Synovir is a treasure in itself and for all of Ukraine. So maybe that's the way, in a trivial way, we talk about the resources we have and what we want to do with them. The way this panel hopefully will unfold, given the internet and Zoom and conditions beyond our control, we'll ask each of our panelists to spend about 15 minutes sharing with us their particular insights about ecological challenges. There'll be a short question and answer period immediately after that, where the panelists will have a chance to address each other. And then I'll be monitoring the chat function. So please, attendees, during this, if you have a question that you want to have addressed to the panelists, please get your questions into the chat box. So we'll take the last 15 minutes to raise at least some of your questions to the panel. Please keep in mind that we welcome your input. So if you have additional insights about environment, is challenge in the war. For those of you that are affiliated with Fulbright, what can be the role of Fulbright and Fulbrighters in this situation? Please forward your comments to the Fulbright office in Kiev. We will read them and see where we go next. And again, this is being recorded by popular demand. I understand the Secretary of State is in Kiev right now, so I hope maybe he'll get a chance to enjoy the recording well. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to turn the screen and microphone over to Dr. Sergiy Zibtsev, who will be our first panelist. So, Sergiy.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Thank you for presentation and organizing of this meeting. And first of all, thank you for Fulbright program. I actually applied for Fulbright program in 2003 and get a grant in 2004. And so this has actually impacted in positive way all my career. And we're still working with Yale University, and soon maybe we will publish a book which will tell about the impact of war on forest of Ukraine. Victor Myroniuk and myself, we represent National University of Life and Environmental Sciences, and also Regional Eastern Europe Fire Monitoring Center. So we are working with forest and fires. And yesterday I visited Hala Trust site near Bucha in Mila village. And the foresters also were there of Kyiv Forestry Enterprise. So, for example, Kyiv Forestry Enterprise have 26,000 hectares of forest managing. And from this 26, 15 is contaminated by unexploded ordnance. So, yes, we should talk about environment, but also we should talk about the agencies and people who care about the environment, because foresters respond on fires without personal protection means, equipment very often. And so this we are working with Forest Release. This is a US NGO, Canadian NGO, recently established with another Fulbrighter, Brian Milakovsky, who spent a year in Ukraine in 2010, I think. And so we are actually any help, any support, any donations toward Ukraine, including Fulbright network, will be very, very helpful, because help is needed. Of course, all attention is shaped to military battles, but also many people, including, for example, Kupiansk, including Kremena, including Izum. The foresters are there from Ukrainian side. They continue to care about forests to stop fires, but of course they need support. Yes, I will I have 15 minutes, so let me briefly. In regional Eastern Europe Fire Monitoring Center, we started monitoring of fires in Ukraine since March 2022. So in fact, we map with every fire, every single fire, vegetation fire or landscape fire, including forest fire, grass fire, cropland fire. So everything that is burning on a land cover, we map, and then I will show you statistic for 22, and now we continue to do mapping in 23. Talking about impact, of course, shelling and zone of direct battles is suffer very much. Soon the paper of Maxim Matsala will be published about the mechanical damage of forest from shelling. But mechanical damage is one part of this, and the fires that ignited by every shelling, by every tank. Actually, tank, when he's coming, he ignited forest. So it's really big, and the diversity of modern weapon, it's just impressive. I mean, yeah, there is a people who develop more weapon, more diverse, more effective, unfortunately, to kill people and kill environment. So yes, east of Ukraine, I can say heavily impacted by, and north heavily impacted by war. And this is a video from Bucha, how the forest fire ignited, I mean, blowing up unexploded ordnance. And you see this on the video. This is a state emergency service of Ukraine. It's not foresters. And this people is equipped with personal protection equipment, with helmets and life-saving vest. But foresters, unfortunately, not in all cases protected. So we have started to work with forest release together on demining or non-technical survey and demining of forest, because for the moment, forest is not a priority in cleaning of territories. It's first of all agriculture and villages. And so you can see in the map on the right side in Gorodnya forestry, this is a pieces of contaminated forest in red map. And then you see the actually typical for Ukraine mosaic of forest, agriculture, villages, and other type of land cover. And fires is usually started on some agriculture lands, but then they can enter these red spots. And then there is no solution for the moment what to do with these fires, which blown up. And then on the left side, on the right side picture, you can see the Kremena, that mechanical damage that we are talking. Actually, this forest will die because this is a pine. So, and thousands of hectares in Kherson, in Kremena, in Lugansk Oblast, in Kharkivska looks like there. And then the picture from Chernobyl zone, where actually two threats now combined is radioactivity and also mines. So yeah, unique situation. Ukraine push international organization that deals with mine actions to rewrite procedures and protocols of non-technical survey, technical survey, etc., because it's so big and it's so complicated topic. Yeah, so what we do together with Zoe International, we monitor daily front line since 24 of February, and then calculate, Victor will tell more, how he did this, calculated area of single fire, and then have a statistics on all fires. And but it's already clear that this is a picture from Chernobyl, that fires heavily affected. Even Chernobyl was occupied maybe 2 months, but fires heavily affected 25,000 hectares, I think, area in Chernobyl. So Victor will tell more in more detail how we map every fire, and we calculated also carbon emission from every fire. And this is the results. So we calculated in 2 zones. It's a battle zone. It's 60-kilometer strip along the front line, daily front line, and then yellow it's occupied territory, and brown this is a most intensive shelling zone. And of course, weather is very important. March was dry and a lot of fires. Same with July and August. In general, 22nd was a quite a good year in terms of fire. It was not extreme, but anyway, Ukraine reached, unfortunately, record in terms of area burned. And then we also look on land cover. So we look on forest fires in coniferous forest, and all kind of agricultural lands, cultivated lands, croplands, pastures, etc., etc. And we should talk not about only impact of war, but climate change. Climate change entered Ukraine, I think, between 2010 and 2020, and we have a disaster, catastrophic fires in Lugansk Oblast, in Chernobyl in 2020, and now we expect the 24-25 like extreme fire year, which will be combined impact of war and the impact of climate change. And but it is difficult to be prepared for this because of lack of resources. So yes, we need more resources. So this is a MAPS result for fires in 22. Of course, they first of all related with a military action in March, in Kiev Oblast, in Chernihiv Oblast, in Sumy, and it's continue now in Kharkiv. If you know, in eastern Ukraine, the river Seversky Donets, it's actually a very important river from point of view of pine forest, which is on a sand arena along the river of Seversky Donets. They're essentially damaged by fires and by mechanical damage, and it's continue to do similar the forest in Kherson, which is a desert actually. But also you see the regular picture from Ukraine, in western Ukraine, in Lviv Oblast, in Transcarpathian Oblast. That fire is not related with war, not related with military action. This is people, actually rural communities use fire to clean their fields, etc. So this is a complicated, at least 3 factors: rural population, climate change, and war combined in impact of environment, all kind of landscapes. We are talking not only forests, but all kind of landscapes. So we did like raw assessment of carbon emissions, and from our point of view, during 22, 5.4 million tons of CO2 and other greenhouse emissions were related. This is directly related to war. So it's a battle zone and occupied zone. It's not take into account western part of Ukraine, but the biggest emissions, of course, is the croplands. So intentionally or non-intentionally, but they're burning, and of course our state emergency service concentrate on protection of population, humanitarian support, while fires become like less important for them, or they are not able to respond to every fire. So yeah, before the war, we developed this national landscape fire management strategy for Ukraine. It's on the public hearing stage. It's a new approach to manage landscape fires, because climate change is coming. Its impact is, even war will be ended. We will face anyway climate change, and of course, we developed some components of national landscape fire management, including trainings, including, you see the lady, this is just volunteers in Lugansk. It's a picture of 2021, when we did a training with volunteers who ready to fight fires after this huge disastrous fires Also, we promote silviculture tools for making more safe our villages. You see, unfortunately, Simona Blame is our student who helped us to establish fire resilient edges in April, maybe 2020. He passed away. He was killed in Severodonetsk, but aviation bomb. And so we have, of course, among our students, more than 10 people already killed. But our approach that the special forests should be near the villages to stop the fire which is coming from forests. So we are trying to implement this. And then we also would like to test in Ukraine this German system with 2 tanks, tank suppression tank, ignition tank. So yeah, but of course it's expensive. It could be a couple of tanks working in Ukraine, but the main approach is a resilient landscape. This is our priority: resilient landscape and resilient communities. So yes, we are concentrated on risk awareness for local population. We selected communities, OTG, that are on the highest risk of to be burned by forest fires, and also contamination of UXO and other. So we develop these needs. We deliver these needs to Forest Europe process, which is a political process, but also bring this information to donors. So our main efforts is to find the support for local communities and foresters, to provide them with needed gear to fight fires. Thank you for your attention, even less.
Okay, Sergiy, thank you very, very much. It's very informative, and it addresses both problems and solutions. We need to know that. Okay, our second speaker, or our second panelist, is Victor Myroniuk, and Sergiy already mentioned that they've been working together on this, and Victor will be addressing us on remote sensing-based monitoring of Ukraine's forest losses caused by the war. So, Victor.
Okay, thank you, Madhu. So, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this webinar, to this meeting. And I want to focus in my presentation on So I don't want to provide probably exact numbers of area which was damaged during this war, but I mostly focused on to address the methods which we currently use, and we try to adjust this to the problem of assessment of forest damage, not just forest, but environmental damage caused by war. So I want to start with the slide which showed the scale of the impact, and it probably replicates Sergey's information. But of course, the Russian invasion on Ukraine impacted huge areas of forested landscape in Ukraine. And this impact has very long duration, and it has different magnitude on forest. But in most cases, forests are damaged by shelling, by fires which caused by shelling, and some types of mechanical damage, like building fortification, digging soils, and so on. This have very bad impact on forest. So to understand the impact measured by remote sensing, we need to have some reference data. And fortunately, in 2020, we had such opportunity, and group of people under Sergiy Zibtsev supervision was working in burned area in Luhansk on large fire, which burned about 20,000 hectares of forest. And we collected the information about the impact of wildfires on forest health. So it was interesting to know that the fire have very specific impact regarding the site condition and regarding species composition of forest. So we identified that pine forest was the most vulnerable, specifically the forest which grown on dry conditions. And year after fire, we identified that the forest which had moderate level of impact, year after fire it was died. So that is very important information to measure impact, because we are about delayed impact of war on forest, and I think that some effects we will see a bit later, some times after the war. If you look at this map, you will find out where pine forest mostly located within war zone. So first of all, this is northern regions in Ukraine. And of course, this is Chernobyl exclusion zone, which affected too much in first 2 months of invasion. Secondly, this pine forests near Severodonetsk, Kremina, Izum, in Luhansk and Kharkiv regions. We also identify some hotspots where the impact of war is really serious, located along the border with Russia. And for example, you can see the example captured in June this year. This forest was constantly shelled by artillery, and this caused fires. If you look at this picture, we understand that the scale is big, and to analyze the impact of war on environment of forest, we need some advanced methods. Of course, we cannot collect this information by terrestrial, by field sampling, by field surveys, because of different reasons. First of all, this is dangerous. This is dangerous for humans to collect data, to be in such forest, even after the war, because this lands contaminated by landmines and some other dangerous things like unexploded ordnance and so on. Second, if we want to measure effect today, it's dangerous to be close to border. We have many examples when foresters were killed next to borders to Russia. So remote sensing remote sensing provide very important is very important to collect such data for large scales. And firstly, during my stay in US, during my Fulbright program, I spent 9 months working with great people from US Forest Service and the Reconstruction State University, and we applied the methods which were used in US to map forests. And we managed to apply this methodology for some regions in Ukraine. Now we can adjust this to map forest damage caused by war. So in particular, we utilize very dense time series of satellite observation, and we use some kind of modeling to identify disturbance events. So I feel like this slide can provide you with insight what actually we do. So any pixel have some specific temporal trends in spectral information, and it has some cycling character when it is stable. But when we have some disturbance event, we can find new type of temporal trend, and this helps us to identify hotspots of disturbance. So what we can do, we can first of all, we can identify the areas which were disturbed. We can identify the dates, the years when the forest or any kind of landscape was disturbed, and we also can measure magnitude of these disturbances. And if we have some field reference data, then we can evaluate this disturbance more precisely. So this is a very powerful tool which can capture not just rapid forest losses like fires. It can capture long-lasting effect of disturbance. For example, if ground fire burned trees, they can die year, 2 years, 5 years after the fire. So we can measure this using satellite time series. This is a very interesting example which demonstrate how the landscape was changed. This is region, this is Kremina, yes, Izum Kremina. In this area, in this close-up example, you can see Izum and neighboring forest. So, of course, forest disturbances were typical for such areas for a long period of time, but the amount of damaged forest significantly increased in 1 year during the war. So if you look at the bottom, the left map, you can compare the proportion between yellow and magenta colors. But you should understand that yellow represents the forest disturbance for 15 years within this area. Probably these events were associated with some weather condition, with some climate and so on. But magenta shows what was killed in 1 year after the fire. Specifically, you also can see that satellite imagery precisely capture not just forest but other effect of war on the environment. For example, you can see this dam which drained during one year. I also want to share next example. This is Chernobyl exclusion zone, and if you look at this animation, you will find some disturbance events. This demonstrates weekly progression of land cover, and you can see some fires within this area. So using satellite imagery, we can provide some methods for measuring the effect of war over large areas. This is very important because this area will be inaccessible. And this is a perfect tool to collect such information to understand the effect and use this in different purposes. I can provide some ideas how this can be used. First of all, we can identify exact dates of forest disturbance. I believe that this is very important information which can be used as evidence of war crimes against environment. You can see this animation which demonstrate, which captures the dates of wildfires, of fires, of forest damage. We can measure the magnitude. We can measure. We can map forest disturbances over large areas to identify the scale of damage. We can also use. We can also predict magnitude of disturbance, and this will help us to understand what we should expect from the landscape in the future. Probably the forest will die or it will survive. And it was shown on the picture in previous slide that this is also can be used not just like direct information on war impact. This is very important source of data which can be used by scientists in different modeling exercises. For example, to measure wildfire effect on landscape, to predict future development of forests, and so on. Finally, I want to summarize what basically we can propose for practitioners, for foresters who faced this huge problem. And of course, this is large areas of forest which were disturbed or removed or killed. So what will be the future of such forest? I think that remote sensing and long time series can help us to understand which forest conditions or forest structure are, I would say, forest structure and species composition fits the best the target forest in the future, because we observe climate change. And it is very important to understand what forested landscape will be in the future regarding all these challenges. For example, currently we understood that planting just pine forest, that was a mistake in the past. This is very vulnerable forest to insects, to wildfires, and so on. So these methods can help us to figure out which species composition will be the best for particular sites within disturbed areas. So that's all I wanted to share with you, and I believe that advanced remote sensing technology will help us to resolve this very difficult issue. Thank you.
Victor, thank you very much for showing us the power of remote sensing. So we begin to get an idea of the extent of environmental damage and also how it's a tool for the future. Thank you. Final panelist is Kateryna Bystrytska. Kateryna is a PhD student at Rutgers, and she's very expert on the role of communication in dealing with environmental policy and trying to save the environment. So, Kateryna.
Hello, everyone. And first of all, thanks Fulbright for this panel, and thanks to my colleagues for such a great presentation. And as already mentioned, I'm not an environmental scientist, but I'm a communication scientist. And that's why I'll be speaking more about the role of communication and specifically what different international organizations do in Ukraine, and what is the green reconstruction of Ukraine as idea, and what we are all doing for this green reconstruction. For the last year, I work as a communication officer in Greenpeace, Central and Eastern Europe, and we work specifically in Ukraine for the project Green Reconstruction of Ukraine. So first I will outline what Greenpeace is doing and where this idea of green reconstruction came from. So that Greenpeace still doesn't have an office in Ukraine, but September last year, they decided that they want to support somehow the reconstruction movement and advocate for a green and sustainable recovery. And that's why the whole project of green reconstruction have a few points. The first one is the reconstruction of social infrastructure, and why it's quite related to the topic of environmental reconstruction. It's mostly because we advocate that the whole things that we reconstruct should be done in a green, sustainable, and energy efficient way, because we can't reconstruct what we had before. We can't just rebuild the old system. If we already have a new solution, if we already have a green technologies, so we need to use them for reconstruction of Ukraine. And this was the main idea for the whole project, how to show the Ukraine, the society of Ukraine, that you can use all those new methods, all those new technologies. And for this purpose, Greenpeace did the first project of reconstruction of hospital in Horenka. And we changed the heating system of this heated hospital for energy efficient. They have a heat pump, they have a solar panel, and they highly efficient and can work even without electricity. So it was a first project, and the idea of this Greenpeace project to make a lot of such projects all over Ukraine. And for example, now we started with the 3 other projects in Ochtyrka, in Shepetivka, in other cities that was damaged because of war, by pushing this idea, so let's use those green tech for reconstruction of your buildings. Why it was important? Because we saw that when we start speaking about reconstruction, people just use the old system that they had before because it's faster, and it's understandable because people need places to go for a doctor, they need schools, people need kindergartens, and they need to make it fast. And unfortunately, in many cases, this green solution is not so fast as we would like to have it. But we are trying to show that it also can be fast, and it also can be a part of emergency package for Ukraine. Another part of the work that Greenpeace is planning to do in Ukraine and just started to work with is the mapping of environmental damages that was since the beginning of war. And I would say since from 2014, so not for the full scale only. And this is the work that we did together with Ukrainian NGO EcoAction, who was focusing on gathering the data, and Greenpeace mapping team was proving all the cases by satellite images. And we have this environmental damage map with all the data that we can prove by satellite. And now we are working with gathering more and more cases into this map. So it's something that ongoing project. And the last third part that Greenpeace is focusing on Ukraine is working with the nuclear topic. And I think that Greenpeace was one of the first international independent team that came to Chernobyl to assess the damage that was done by Russians during the occupation of this zone. So this is the huge part of the work that will still continue in the next years, because Greenpeace is planning to still research these places that was damaged and to understand how we can recover those Chernobyl zone. And now we also monitor the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and what is happening with this occupied nuclear power plant. But when we speak about the idea of green reconstruction, it's not something that only Greenpeace as environmental organization is doing, but it's something that a lot of other organizations is only part of. And I also see some colleagues who can tell maybe even more about the Build Back Better coalition that exists in Ukraine. It's a coalition of environmental organizations that work for reconstruction, but not only like in general, but also focusing on the green reconstruction and trying to push this green agenda. So this not only international organization, but I would like mention that a lot of Ukrainian NGOs working very hard to do a lot of changes in reconstruction. And for example, EcoAction is working a lot with data. And Razom We Stand and Eco Club and Energy Act for Ukraine, there's a lot of Ukrainian local NGOs who work for green reconstruction. So it's not only the help from international parts, but a lot of work from Ukrainians in this topic. And as I work with communication mostly, so my insights and something that I can put into agenda and want to discuss maybe a little bit more this how we communicate this green reconstruction and why it's important to start this whole discussion about reconstruction now, not waiting when the war will be done, when we will win, have a victory, and then let's start to reconstruct the country. Unfortunately, it's not happening this way. And there is like a few reasons. First of all, because when we speak about the reconstruction of housing and social infrastructure, it means that we need to do it very quickly now, because cities are liberated and people coming back home and they want to have like a normal life, even being in this war zone. And it means that we need to find a very fast solution how not to allow all these old outdated technologies back to Ukraine. Just one of the cases, we were visiting one of the hospitals looking for what we can do for reconstruction, and we found that this hospital is still using like very old outdated coal system for heating, and it's like working it's very expensive for them, and it's definitely not energy efficient, and it's definitely affect the environment so that it's around this hospital, and like it's affect a lot. But they was not considering how to change it into more energy efficient, because they just didn't think about it like as a things that we need to change, because this is also a part of environmental change and environmental reconstruction that we will have in Ukraine. So this is the first thing, that all this discussion how to reconstruct should be happening now. We can't wait for months, for a year or more, just to find a better time for discussing how to reconstruct Ukraine and why it should be green. Because all the plans for reconstruction and even financial plans, they're doing like usually at the end of the year for the next year. And if green reconstruction won't be in those plans, it means that we can't change it in a year. So we need to start this discussion already now to understand what we can do for changing something in this whole reconstruction process. Another thing that is quite important when we communicate with people about how you see the reconstruction is that reconstruction of building and reconstruction of nature, this is something that should go together, because as I said, when you reconstruct the hospital and still have this old coal outdated system, it means that you're not doing something good for environmental. It means that you're just having the same or probably even worse. That's why it's important to implement all those solutions and understand this is something that will affect our quality of life in the years. It's not like a fast solution. Let's build something because we need to live somewhere, but let's find a way how to make it fast and efficient and green. Now, not waiting for a long time. The next thing is that why it's became difficult to communicate about green reconstruction is because people do not know a lot about it. And a few weeks ago, I came back from the Greenpeace camp. We have 62 people in Carpathian Mountains. It was activists, NGOs, municipalities who were gathering in one place to discuss green technologies. And we found that when you ask people what green technologies you know and want to implement, the only one is solar panel. And it means that we need to bring more knowledges for people, and it will help them to choose the right solution for their building, their infrastructure, and their cities, their municipalities. And probably the last thing that I would also point, maybe it's not a problem, more like a challenge for communicating and building this communication about reconstruction, is that we need to understand that the main role for the whole reconstruction is the role of civil society and the local communities. It will be impossible to do something just bringing ideas or send some money from government to local municipalities if people don't want to be a part of this green movement and share this idea of green reconstruction. So it was a challenge for us to explain them why you need to spend more time and think about not only tomorrow, but about months, year, and about the nature of Ukraine in general, not only about your one building, how it's related one to another, but it's something that we should do and spend a lot of time on it. And I saw that a few months ago, Lviv Media Forum, they had a white paper about communication on reconstruction. And they mentioned that one of the biggest problems is that we not put communication about this topic quite on a high level. We think that reconstruction will happen. It's something that everyone agrees that it should be, and we do not pay a lot of attention how to explain it to people, how to make it more accessible, all the knowledge that we can share. And they put it like one of the problems, one of the challenges, but it's something that we should work with. So I would say that, to summarize, that the role of this local municipalities is huge. And I would say that for Greenpeace, who was doing the first project in Horenka, reconstructing the building of hospital, it would be impossible to manage everything if you won't find a local organization who knew everything about this building, who have all the contacts, who can help arrange everything. And this is people who live in this place and who understand what they need, how they need to build this new hospital, what they need for their municipalities. And that's why when we speak about the whole reconstruction process, we need to understand that the first thing is people and local communities. This is their work, their role. If they don't have enough knowledge, okay, let's give this knowledge for them. Let's help them to make this reconstruction better and the way that we will all benefit from this. And yeah, it's quite difficult to speak about housing and nature together, but we should understand that all our nature and all our environmental was already damaged a lot by war. And we can't allow to damage it even more by doing the reconstruction, by saving all outdated solution. And this is the idea that we advocate and a lot of other organizations advocate. And I hope that in the nearest future, we will see that all the reconstruction project is green, sustainable, energy efficient, and it's something that will help not only for having like life quality in a good, nice building, but also to have a recovered environment in Ukraine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kateryna. Touch on the incredible gap between what needs to be done and what we need to know to get people's wills behind that. So that's a major issue. Okay, we're doing well on time, so I'd like to just pull out some significant issues that I heard and ask our panelists if they'd be willing to respond to it. The first thing, Sergiy, you had an intriguing concept about resilience. You mentioned resilience of forests and resilience of communities. And I'd like to hear from you and from the other panelists. Is there a point where things get so bad that there's a limit to resilience? Or are you taking an essentially optimistic opportunity that forests and communities, given enough funding and enough time, can recover? What do you mean by resilience?
Yeah, this is indeed a very widely used term. And there is a nice presentation of European Fire Institute defining actually this term. We started to implement this in Lugansk area. Victor mentioned that we study history of reforestation and afforestation in Lugansk for 100 years because there was a sense and there was impact on agricultural lands and after Second World War, Soviet Union established a lot of forest, and that was a pine forest. And that was, like Victor mentioned, a mistake because now we see the results of this wrong, even in no climate change at that period, of this absolutely wrong approach. And Stens, which is a very nice actually, who visited them, one lady in chat actually mentioned that she is from Rubizhne. Yeah, yes, okay. So, yes, we already discussed that you're from that areas. So, at that moment, of course, we should look for future. And forestry, the problem for the moment for foresters, it's uncertainties of tomorrow, uncertainties of climate change, and we have additionally uncertainties of war. So what we actually propose to Lugansk communities, we work there with local communities, because before to come to foresters and propose to them fire resilient pine stands, we discussed it with communities. They were not happy with the idea to harvest some pine to make a pine stand more resilient to ground fires, to intensive extreme fires. But in the end, they supported it. So we started with communities, then we talked to Kateryna mentioned that social aspects is the most important actually. Yes, we need agreement between stakeholders. If you are talking about forestry, there is a lot of stakeholders in forestry. People visiting forests, people pick up mushrooms, people enjoy forest. It's nice green, effects, ecosystem services, etc., etc. So we started with the local population and for 2-3 seminars showing them solutions. They agreed to do this resilient forest, pine forest, with just reduction of density. So they have maybe 5,000 or 4,000 pines per hectare, but we propose them to harvest this half. So to have like open, like in eastern Montana, if you visited the pine forest in eastern Montana, you see the model, which we actually would like to implement in Lugansk. But then we moved to resilient communities. and we talked to them. You should be prepared to protect your village from fire. You can do it. Not just evacuate like emergency service propose you. As soon as fire will approach the settlement, of course, the evacuation is important but you can try to save your houses from burning, because some villages were completely burned, like Smoleninova, completely burned village. So, and this ideas was they're very happy with these ideas. Unfortunately, war started and we could not implement it. Now we continue to work in Chernigov Oblast in a village Kasachivka, which is also surrounded by pine forest. So in case of big fire, the village will be burned. So this is a resilient concept. Of course, we hosted for the moment Brian Ross, who is from Edmonton. And I don't see the solution for Canada, for example, such like this, because in Lugansk, we proposed them to increase hardwood share in the forest. It's possible because soils they are quite rich. So in the end, it's a capacity of soils. It's a capacity of weather or weather condition, and this is a knowledge. This should be scientific knowledge. This will build like a resilient concept, resilient of landscape and resilient of communities. Shortly.
Okay, thank you. Kateryna, Victor, any remarks about resilience, viable concept, or do we hit limits with it?
I don't think that I can say something new, but this was something that like probably not only us, but other organizations saw when started to work with, that sometimes it's hard to start, but after you finish the project, you see the whole this like rebuilding as a part of resilience for Ukraine, because this is also something that we want to have, and underline that all the reconstruction is done by the Ukrainian hands, not just by financing. And one more thing, that when we speak about the reconstruction, mostly about reconstruction of nature, it's impossible to solve it just by sending money or funding something, because the nature, it's not about the money, it's more about ideas, solution, and that's why we also should to think about it as a part of like general Ukrainian resilience when we start the whole this nature reconstruction.
Okay, thank you. Next question. This is a communication question, but I think all three of you have touched on it. One way or the other, you've all talked about needing to address communities so they see that green principles are really in their own best interest. And in many of these communities, though, you're trying to talk about green principles to people who are grieving. Okay, they're in the middle of having lost, okay, maybe loved ones, maybe their village, maybe their job. There's different ways that there's grief. How do you try to present sophisticated technical knowledge that says this is in your own best interest to build a green hospital, to rebuild your village using green principles, to put up fire-resistant habitats around your villages? Any practical concerns about when you have a society that's grieving, not just individuals, but you have a society in grief? How does that change communicating technical knowledge to them?
I probably can start, as I mostly focus on communication. So yes, you're 100% right that it's sometimes very difficult to start even this whole conversation about the reconstruction. And it was when we were presenting this project in international meetings, the first question was always how you can speak with people about reconstruction when those people is in the middle of war. And I lived in Ukraine during all those 1 year. So I also a part of this, and I feel this because I'm inside of the country. But the problem is that the reconstruction will be happened anyway. We want this or we don't, we want to wait, it doesn't matter, it will happen. And the idea is to make it better and bring more quality to this. And I was filming a lot of stories from these cities, and all the time you start speaking with people and asking about their life, sometimes life before the occupation, or some cities was not occupied but was quite close to the war zone, to the front line. And it's always very hard, and you can't have like a one solution, so do this and that and that. There is like no solution for these things, but you need to start and to feel and to understand how to speak with those people, because they're all different and all cities are different. Some cities was in occupation, some was not, some was quite far from the front line. Some of them just have one hit during the whole war, but it was very like a huge one and they lost a lot of places. But even when it's hard, anyway, we can start, we should start this communication, because if we won't do it, it means that in a year we will see how someone reconstruct all the building, all the other places, not only building, but like start this nature reconstruction in the way that we don't want. And this is a place where we will live. And it's why we should be a part of this reconstruction, not just waiting that someone will come and rebuild and save your old coal heating system. Yeah, you should be involved on it. And even through the hard communication, it should be started, and then it can go in any different ways. So it's just based from my experience, what we have in this communication on reconstruction.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from the panelists about how do you communicate knowledge to people for their own good?
Yes, in Lugansk, actually, our experience show, first of all, after invasion of 2014, in part of Lugansk that was controlled by government of Ukraine, were established very powerful non-governmental, I mean, very powerful non-governmental, I forgot the word, громадянське суспільство. And so this was our first partner, who environmental activist, and the other activist who actually communicated with people a lot. And so there was our, let's say, tool and partner to bring messages to communities, to actually local population. We talked with old people, for example, in village Kudrashovka and others. But it's first of all, so yes, civil society is very important, is really very important. But second, also understanding that in case no changing, then the local population will be in trouble. This was understandable by administration of oblast, governor of oblast, but also local population. They actually talk to foresters, please do not plant pine more. We don't want to burn our villages. And so foresters, of course, under that pressure, contacted us and the university and asked what we can plant on this sands, except pine. So, but the starting of this discussion is very important, because of course science can provide a good options for solutions, but important that society requested these options. And in this case, the solution could be found and implemented by administration or agencies of forestry or another agency. So Yes, civil society is very important. Leadership is very important because we met a very nice leaders who supply local people after the war with roof reconstruction, with other help, with small business development, etc., etc. So through these tools, the changes could be implemented quite fast within 1-2 years. I mean, in heads, but not in forest, of course. For changing in forest to create fire resilient stand, you need 20-30 years. For example, ages, fire resilient ages. So yes, first of all, changes in thinking, but then regular and work on a forest to change landscape, because we see from Greece, from Turkey, from Italy, from Portugal, from California, from Canada, that landscape must be changed because we are living in Paracen era. This is different. So all big coniferous massives of forest, they will be burned for sure.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let's move on to a few questions from our participants. And there's, Victor, two for you that I'd like to bring up. The first is just a very practical one. For remote sensing, what level of scientific cooperation do you think there is or should be for you to get the satellite data you need, for example, with the Ukrainian Space Agency?
Yes, I tried to address this question, but I can do it right now. So, unfortunately, not. We don't have experience with Ukrainian satellite data, and we have some explanation for that. First of all, we work at large scale. So Ukraine requires a lot of data, and to create a high quality image mosaic for such area, we need a lot of data. Even if we ask some information from space agency, we will probably lack enough data to build our models. So that's why we mostly focused on free available and deep Landsat and Sentinel time series to perform our work. In many cases, the spatial resolution of 20 or 30 meters are good for us because we try to classify landscape, forests, not individual trees.
Okay, thank you. And just a follow-up question on trees, a very practical question. What, if anything, is the collectability and the usability of trees and forests that have been destroyed by war? Is there opportunity for any kind of recycling here?
Yes, I mentioned the paper that will be published maybe soon, Matsala and others, related to mechanical damage, and then follow-up management scenario. But of course, we shouldn't forget unexploded ordnance and landmines. I visited Hollow Trust site near Kiev, near Bucha. There was a one tank, and before tank, I mean 200 meters in front of tank, there was 5 grenades established to make impossible approach to tank to Ukrainian army. So, and Kiev Oblast was occupied within, 2 months. But in Lugansk area, in Kharkiv area, Oblast, we have 1 hour, more than 500 days. So unless forest will be cleaned, we could not think about use of timber, and this timber will be contaminated with ordnance. So it's almost impossible to use it. This is a big issue because the areas is really big in Lugansk. In single Lugansk Oblast, before the 2014, there was 80,000 hectares of pine, 80,000. Then first Ukrainian-Russian war destroyed 40,000. When we arrived to Lugansk Oblast, it was only 40,000. But now even that 40,000 was maybe burned, or majority of them. And so, but from the other side, as we see, like Kakhovska, found that there is a good chance to restore natural ecosystems, because pine forest, of course, were there. We found a picture of more than 100-year-old that demonstrated a pine in Lugansk, which is out of natural range of pine. Mm-hmm. But it's not such in such way like the Soviet Union do this. Is hundreds of thousands of hectares of only pine, pure pine stands. So yeah, it's a good question, but maybe we can address them only after the war will be ended. So this is like more humanitarian aspects.
Okay, and then a question that kind of goes from individual trees to the planet. Very provocative question. How would you make the case? What evidence would you have for arguing that ecocide, term in the question, is not simply a local or a regional phenomenon, but the ecocide that you've been describing right here really has global significance, not just local? Anybody want to speak to this as a global issue rather than simply local?
I think it will be first case if the some justice process will be initiated in ecocide. It will be first case, but it's important lesson for world that totalitarian regime should not make such damage. Otherwise, they will be punished. And so it's important to push this, like Victor mentioned, to collect some evidences, scientifically approved and maybe legally approved, and then to promote such a justice process. But I'm not a lawyer, of course. So, but OSCE, I think, OSCE preparing a report that will serve for these justice purposes for the moment.
Okay, and there was a comment that I think turns into a question. The discussion here has been largely about destruction of forests and reforestation. Habitat question was raised. Well, gee, do grasslands or steppes offer some greater resistance to fire or other natural disasters than rebuilding forests? Anybody want to speak to that point?
So I can start just probably to explain why in my presentation I mostly focused on forest. Then the reason was very simple. It is interesting that quantify the scale of damage using satellite imagery much easier for forest, because forest is stable during large period of times and it has more stable spectral information. That's why this approaches, from my point of view, should work much better and much precisely than for grasslands, which can generate every year. So that's why, so from my perspective, remote sensing, of course, can be informative and can provide such important information. But in most cases, it can be done by manually, for example, using high-resolution imagery and delineate areas where grasslands or shrublands were damaged. So that's why more interesting aspect of combining field data and remote sensing, I can see with forests. So
Okay, thank you. One final question, possibly too political or provocative, so feel free to ignore it. In all of your presentations, you all mentioned one way or the other the need for outside agencies to work with Ukraine in various capacities. I didn't hear the European Union or the European Green Deal mentioned specifically. And I wondered if anybody would want to comment on what you think the merits or the disadvantages might be of the European Green Deal as part of an outline for reconstruction in Ukraine. Well, maybe that answers the question. I've been mystified by it in trying to read about it. So this was my attempt to see if it has any practical bearing on environmental reconstruction. Okay, well, thank you very, very much to our panelists. Your presentation.
There is Alexander who would like to provide comment.
Oh, I missed that.
I would like just to very short comment. I just held a presentation on the European Congress of Herpetologists about the impact of war on herpetofauna, on amphibians and reptiles, but mostly because we don't have enough people recording in real time what is going on the front line. It is not possible. I relied mostly on a remote sensing technologies to see how the habitats of reptiles and amphibians are impacted. And not directly concerning your question, but we are working, and Horizon Europe is available scheme of financing of research is available in Ukraine. And yes, there was recently a call for project, but they are a little bit more complicated that we are used to here in Ukraine to obtain and to process by Ukrainian unexperienced in European bureaucracy communities, scientific communities and institutions. But we are having no choice then to move in this direction because our own money are depleted by war. And I see another problem coming from the situation. Many of our scientists left the country. We have a lack of a new people in the science, and most of the young people are leaving. And we don't have enough people to do that. I don't know how we will cope with this challenge, but this is seriously very, very dangerous situation as for me. Who will monitor the changes, mitigate consequences of the war, and in general, who will live here? I'm sorry for such a pessimistic view.
Yeah, but a very, very important one that describes the situation as it is. Yes. Okay, we are just about out of time. Thank you again to our panelists. Please, if you have comments, suggestions, either about environmental policy or directions in particular, or about the role of Fulbright in Ukraine, and for that matter, in Eastern and Central Europe, please get those to the Fulbright office in Kyiv. Okay? Thanks very much. Have a good day. Hope we'll see you again. Bye-bye.